Baby girl. Hello, my friends. Hello, my life warriors, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Day In, Day Out podcast. Woo! Today on episode 343, I'm very lucky, privileged to have Eugene Lee on the podcast. He is a burnout recovery coach helping high achievers build a healthy work life balance and breaking the stigma around mental health in the workplace. He also is a podcaster as well, to say the least, and one hell of a researcher. How are you today, sir?
Miwa, thanks for having me. I'm great. I'm great. Like, where do I even begin? Like, at the moment we're going through a massive level 4 thunderstorm here in Switzerland. So, it's like 30 degrees Celsius, and next thing it just like drops about 10 degrees. Next thing there's just torrential rain coming in. I'm like, I really hope that the thunder doesn't affect the sound quality of the podcast, but we'll see how it goes.
You're coming through loud and clear. I'm happy to have you here today. Oh, yes. I have to ask. Look, now, what put you on this path of basically a burnout recovery coach? Not a very popular thing, I would say.
Not a very popular thing. It basically came from scratching my own itch. When I was 27 years old, I thought that I was having a heart attack at work. And just going about my day as usual, about 4 hours into a 12-hour shift. And I said, okay, I'm just going to sit down for a bit before I go for my morning coffee. And next thing I realized I couldn't stand up. I was like, I can't, I could feel the feeling going in my legs. I couldn't breathe. And next thing I was hyperventilating. And I was like, this can't be a heart attack. Eugene, you're 27 years old. And I like to think I'm pretty healthy. I don't know what's going on here. And I panicked, and I didn't want, at the same time, I didn't want to ask anyone around me for help because I was too humiliated to say, oh, I need help right now. I'm a 27-year-old man and I need help to get off a chair. And finally I got my breath and I was like, okay, I'm going straight to the doctor about this. I was rang my manager and said, I'm going straight to the doctor. I'm not feeling well. And even then, my manager was like, that's not like Eugene to say that he's not feeling well. And I went to my doctor, started explaining all these symptoms, and she prescribed me with 4 weeks off work and recommended taking 2-hour walks every day. And I was like, I can't do that. I've never taken time off work. That's just completely foreign to me. And she was like, this is precisely why you need it. And I still hold her to that. I commend her so much that she didn't prescribe me any medication. For all the symptoms that I had, she said, what you need is just to take a step back, breathe in some fresh air, and process your thoughts. That was something that I had never heard before. That I was like, okay, I was so stuck in this loop of trying to achieve more and more all the time. If I start speaking too fast, just slow me down because sometimes it's definitely because I'm Irish. I can speak 10 times the speed of everyone else. Maybe people can listen to the podcast and slow it down to point 0.8 or point 0.7.
No, no, no. Please continue. Now, this is the thing. I have to ask. Now, there are many jobs in this world which cause stress and anxiety. But what were you doing at the time as a career to, basically level you so badly you can actually get out of a chair?
Yeah, so I was actually working in what I thought at the time was my dream job. I came fresh out of college. I did food science. Next thing I got a job in food microbiology. And I was there for almost 10 years. I loved the work that I was doing, but it was very strenuous. It was between 48 to 60-hour weeks, 12-hour shifts. And but not only that, I I've always felt that even when I finished a 12-hour shift and I'd get home, I was like, okay, I'm restless. I can't just sit on the couch and watch Netflix. I'd be like, what can I do next? And then it was like, okay, I need to exercise. I need to go to the gym. I need to keep my health up. I need to go for a run. I need to take on extra duties. I was involved in theater productions and things with local community groups. And I always just had extra things. I was like, I need to achieve as much as possible here in my 20s so that when I hit my 40s, I can be like, oh, look, I achieved all that in my 20s. That was the narrative I had in my head. I was like, I need to achieve so much while I'm young and while I have all this energy so that when I don't have this energy level anymore, I can look back and say, I achieved a lot back then. But
Mm,
but I always knew that was never going to be enough. The narrative that I had in my head that was kind of tuned into me, conditioned into me as a child was that if you're ever idle enough to think of X or to think of something um, kind of absent-mindedly, you weren't working hard enough. I came from a farming background, and there was always chores to be done. So anytime I was idle, I'd be like, and I come up with just a random thought, and I'd be like, "Oh, why didn't Harry Potter do this?" And they were like, "Well, if you have time to think about why Harry Potter didn't do this, you're not working hard enough. Get up on the farm and do some work."
wow. It's
so
wow.
so yeah
It's
I mean my parents they raised me the only way they could, and I don't hold that against them. I mean, there's plenty of work always to be done on the farm, but that while that served me as a child and as a teenager, carrying that same narrative into the workplace meant that I never actually took the time to rest and recover
mm,
between work shifts. And over time, when you start that new job and you're like really excited and you're like, oh, I really want to stay here, I don't want to get fired, I want to be seen as the high spirited, high energy person who's always motivated, that tends to wean off usually after the probation phase, or maybe a year or two down the line. You're like, okay, I'm kind of secure, maybe I can ease off a little. But sometimes for me, it was holding up that facade and being like, no, I need to be seen as the high energy, always can't say no to anything. And when that high spirited, high energy starts to wean or starts to wane, I needed to compensate. And that's when things like, I was like, okay, I'm going to maybe have a can of Red Bull or a can of Monster that will give me the energy to get through the day. And over time, and it sounds harmless at first. It's like, okay, just have a can of Red Bull, get me through the day. It got to the point where I had 24 cans, like 2 cases of Monster in the back of my car. And people were like, whoa, it was like whenever they'd open the back of my car. And I'm like, oh, that's okay, that's just for this week at work. And it was, I was like, for a while, it didn't seem like a problem to me because little by little over time, it just became part of my routine.
mm,
And but little by little over time, all of these small habits build up. And that's what led to me having this really unhealthy lifestyle of just Mars bars and Snickers and Monster Energy all in the backseat of my car at my disposal just so I'd get enough energy to get through the day. But then when I get home from work, I'd be like, okay, now that I have this extra little bit of energy that was meant to just carry me through the day, I can't just sit down and relax. I need to do other things to burn that, to expend that energy so that I feel like I've achieved enough. That little narrative in my head was almost like you're never good enough. No matter how much you do, you're never good enough. That was it in a nutshell. So I was always overachieving and never showing myself any compassion when it came to being like, no, Eugene, you did a great job today. It's time to relax. And that's what eventually led to my burnout.
mm. No, like this is the thing. Like I often hear like stories like this, and like it's a case of yeah, you go in a million miles an hour in 50,000 different directions. Like you were overachieving, but did you feel like you were actually making progress in anything you were doing while this was all going on?
Yeah, I mean, I was very grateful for where I was. I was in a great job. I had what from the outside everyone thought that, oh, Eugene's living a happy, successful life. I had the car, I had the house, I was in a great relationship. And next thing, everything just started to crumble apart over time. And it was from the outside looking in, everyone's like, "Oh, Eugene can't complain. He's really successful and he's got a great job. He's got the house. Everyone, he can't complain about anything because he should be so grateful for what he has." And that was another part of it, was that I felt that I had no right to complain, because it was like the American dream, or the white picket fence dream that everyone has, of having their own place and having that freedom, that independence, of having a job that they love.
Mm,
And at the same time, I didn't feel fulfilled. And as it started crumbling apart, I didn't feel like I could reach out to people, because I was like, no, no, I'm the one who has everything together. And if I reach out to someone, they're just going to say, well, you should just be grateful for what you have. Why are you complaining? And that's one of the things that held me back from getting help at first, because that internal narrative was saying, you have no right to complain, because you should be grateful for everything you have, everything that you've worked for. And if you're unhappy, that's just you being ungrateful. It wasn't me saying, if you're unhappy, there's something amiss here, there's something that you need to address. It was, no, if you feel unhappy, then you're just being ungrateful, and you need to either shut up about it, or you just need to work through it. And and a lot of the time, that's what I did. I just worked through it. If a negative emotion came up, I'd go onto autopilot and put my head down and go to work. And that, again, all of that emotion built up over time. It was unprocessed, unregulated emotion that built up over time, and all I did was put myself in autopilot. And over time, because I didn't deal with these emotions, and because I just put them down, or I switched them off, and I dulled those negative emotions. When you dull the negative emotions, it also dulls your positive emotions, your positive experience. And I found that when I went out with friends, or when I went to concerts, I didn't get the same buzz, or I didn't get the same euphoria as I used to. That I had completely dulled my sense of enjoyment, because I had dulled the misery. Once you dull one, you dull the other. If you don't experience the misery, you can't fully experience the enjoyment either. And that was part of, let's say, the down spiral into burnout. That only in hindsight is 2020. Only in hindsight did I realize how long of a down spiral it had been before I hit rock bottom.
mm. No, I think people don't realize how close they are, walking the line of the living dead in some regards. Because, like, look, when you don't feel joy and you don't feel sorrow, you don't feel anger, you don't feel anything but that sort of neutral thing, like that neutral hum, which just basically gets you from point A to B. Whew, it's like, where is the satisfaction? Where is the sort of purpose and drive in sort of getting you from the day to day? Uh, Looking at the bigger picture, it must be kind of, I can imagine, I would say frustrating, sad, but I would most probably just say just nothing. And being in that realm of nothing all the time. How did you manage to escape that realm of nothing, that sort of neutral feeling? What kick started you to like go, wait a second, I'm not this.
It was, I mean, it was when I had the 4 weeks off of work that I had time to myself. And in a
Mm,
way, everyone loves how I have these rose tinted glasses when it comes to this, but my 4 weeks happened in January 2020. So
ah,
when just the week that I came back to work, the next week was the first lockdown. And I found out, okay, I didn't only have 4 weeks to recover in 4 weeks, but we had a lot of intermittent shutdowns as a result of the pandemic. So I found out that I had about 3 or 4 months that year where I couldn't leave my house, and I had to sit alone and self reflect. And and at first, I was like, okay, I'm just going to look up online what's the quickest way to recover from this so I can get back into the work. And I was doing everything. I was like, okay, gym, yoga, running, breath work, like anything I could look up online that says would help you to recover from burnout. And next thing I found out, I was like, I am just overwhelming myself with everything, because I was so eager just to overcome burnout. And it wasn't until I just took a step back and I said, which of these activities are actually helping me to process my thoughts, and which
Mhm.
ones are just me escaping from my thoughts. So I just needed to slow everything down. It all came to me taking a step back and taking a deep breath and being like, okay, I'm going to go for a walk. Because when I go for a walk, I can think about my day and I can ask myself, I can question myself, how did I really feel about that? Rather than when I used to come back from a day's work, the first two things that I'd like to do is either go straight to the gym and hit a heavy strength training session, or I'd go for a run and I'd run for 5 or 10K. And when I was running, I didn't have time to process any thoughts. I was either focusing on my breath or I was drowning out everything in the music so that I keep the pace and keep running. And then once I got home, endorphins kick in. It's like, okay, I did a great run. I was not actually processing any of the emotion or any of the stress from that day. As good as going for a run felt, it was a form of escapism. I was basically running away, literally and figuratively, from my negative emotions and never processing them. Instead of processing them, I was just covering them up with that dopamine and endorphin fix that I got from the run. So I had to take a step back and say, okay, which of these activities are helping me to process my thoughts or think about my day? So for me, that was slowing down, walking. Walking was a big thing for me, especially walking in nature. I went down to the local forest and just immersed myself into the woods. And once I get into the deepest part of the woods, I used to call it my happy place. And I just like turn around in circles and like forest bathe for about 5 or 10 minutes, maybe an hour, and just sit there and be like, okay, I'm immersed in the forest sound and try to listen for everything, try and smell the damp soil or smell the leaves on the trees or the grass or the wild garlic and all of these things. Is like, okay, this is where I'm calm. And whatever comes up, whatever thoughts, whatever narrative is in the back of my head, I'll just pluck that out of the air and be like, okay, why am I thinking that? And how do I feel about that thought? And it was only by, it's really raw and uncomfortable at first because you're like, oh, I never actually sit down and spend a moment silent with myself. A lot of the time, if someone says that, to switch off your phone and switch off all devices and just sit in silence alone with your thoughts for 5 minutes, they think it's torture. They think it's like a Chinese torture method or something. It's like, no, it's like sit down and actually listen to yourself. Listen to yourself for 2 minutes and see how you truly feel. People are so uncomfortable with their own silence nowadays that they can't even give themselves that 2 minutes of self reflection every day.
No, because like this is a thing in this day and age. Okay, look, honestly, one of the hardest things and to do in this day and age with everything we've got is being bored. There is no sort of space to be bored. And like when you talk about self-reflection, like yeah, like basically taking that time, forest bathing, as you say, yeah, I think a number of people don't do this. They don't basically take that time. I often talk about the mirror of truth. And when you do the self reflection, when you do that sort of like, yeah, listen to your own inner voice, it's the mirror of truth comes up. And yeah, the mirror of truth can show you some wonderful, beautiful things about yourself. But it shows the ugly truth about yourself as well. And one of the things which is so difficult, if you don't look at the mirror of truth on a regular basis or check in on it, it gets harder and harder and harder to sort of look at your sort of truth, like what your true self is. And like it's, I look, believe you me, it can be ugly, it can be painful, and like you know what, sometimes damn right scary for some people when they look into that mirror. But you've got to look into that mirror more times than sometimes you want to. It helps put you in that place of discomfort, which helps like basically get that motivation to sort of move forward, you know?
It's the same with anything. If you don't use it on a regular basis, It's kind of like you use it or lose it. Or same with going to the gym, or as
mm,
you training for the London Marathon. If you decided that you weren't going to train every, let's say, couple of days a week, if you said, "Oh, I know that marathon is coming up in about 6 months, but I might train twice this week. I might train once next month." And then you're like,
mm,
"Oh, I'm out of habit." And I was like, maybe I'll start training again next month. And the longer you leave it without making a routine and a habit, the more painful it is to get back started. Once you start gaining momentum, once something has momentum, it gains momentum like
mm,
exponentially. It just keeps on getting, if rolling the ball down the hill, it's going to keep on getting faster and faster. Same as if you stop that ball, it's going to be harder to move it again.
mm. Yeah, no, I agree. It is going to be harder to move it again. And like this is the thing, like, okay, 2020, like, okay, I think that was a reset button for a number of people because like it felt like for me, it felt like the whole world at one point sort of collectively just went, what? I can actually take a breath. Like I can actually take a look around because you're not like the whole sort of on that constant treadmill of just go, job, commute, 9 to 5, everything like this. It all stopped, and it was like, okay, there are many a person who went, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? And they asked themselves that question. And some people changed everything. Some people like thought about it and went back to their old ways, but they still had that moment where they could like paused and like what I mean, move forward from there. It's done you the world of good. Let's just say,
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of change since then. If anything, it did give me that time for self reflection to be like, okay, this is the way I've lived for the last almost 10. At that point, it was about 7 years. This is the way I've lived for the last 7 years. And I was like, am I happy with where I am? I'm grateful for what I've achieved. And I just had to start treating myself a bit more compassion, be like, well done, Eugene. This is what you've achieved in 7 years. But is this what you want to do for the next 7 years? Is this where you see yourself in the next 20 years? What would you like to achieve? Are you there now? No, you're definitely not where you want to be. And for me, I was like, great, that means I have a challenge. And in areas of be it my fitness, be it my career, be it my relationship, I was like, am I where I want to be? No, I'm really not. But it's a learning curve to get there? Yes, it is. Great. And same as any video game, it's like, great, I'm at level 27 and I'm going to be, where do I want to see myself at level 40? And
mm,
it was a great way of, for my understanding, was to gamify everything. It's a great way of seeing, okay, this is a challenge. Just because I don't have it now doesn't mean I won't be able to achieve it later. And
yes.
once I enjoy the process, it's the process of leveling up in a video game that you enjoy. If you had a cheat code that got you from level 27 to level 100, you're not going to enjoy it as much as if you were grinding through every level. Is if someone just hands it to you and says, "Oh, look, this is a character level 100, play the game." It's like, no, that it was the whole point of it was the journey to get there and watch
Mm,
you change yourself, the person that you become on that journey. So that's kind of where I'm at even now. There's a lot of things where people are like, "Oh, you're not really good at this particular topic, or you're not really good at this particular skill." And I'm like, "Great, I don't want to be amazing at this skill. I want to see what person I become while I learn that skill at my own pace, without overwhelming myself, and see where it gets me. See who I meet along the way."
no, I get that. No, like this is the thing, like because I would say like using your sort of video game character metaphor. Now, like the whole thing is when you start at level one and you're making your way through that. If you're working through each individual level, the skill sets, the little tips and tricks which make things easier as time goes by. Like if you're just given like you're at 1100, like someone who is at level 10 will basically hand you your backside because they know the sort of like, yeah, oh, I've learned this, that, the other. And like, it's like, going, oh, yeah, my player's more powerful. Doesn't mean jack. Oh, my player's like got a higher skill level. If you might have a higher skill level, but if you don't know how to apply those skills, it's not worth jot. So you know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where I look at so many people in life where they want everything right now. And I have a part of that in myself. But it's like, yeah, but the sort of work, the reps, putting that in time and time again, that's where the growth really comes from. And people, yeah, I won't lie. Instant gratification is instant gratification. It's great. And I love that in the form of if I'm watching like, yeah, a Netflix show. I like my like Netflix show to be there immediately. But if it was a case of, yes, working out, if it was a case of running, training, anything like that, I know the road is a lot longer. Like, yeah, like one day I'll run a 3 hour marathon. Never happened. It's like I'm a hefty boy. But yeah, one of the things did you find you had a sort of crossroads moment where like being a coach could have been easily a personal trainer because the way you talk and like the whole sort of attitude you have, you've got a very sort of personal trainer esque like essence, I would say.
Yeah, I can see 100% where you're coming from. And a lot of people used to always ask me because they were like, "Oh, you always love talking about nutrition." My
Mm,
background was I did food and health science in college, and I
yes.
was always, even my mother said when I was a kid that when I first said that, I'm actually really interested in biology and in food and things. She said, "Well, you're always the one reading the back of the cornflakes box or the back of the Rice Krispie box. Even as a kid, you're always just reading out all the ingredients and looking at the nutrition labels." And just calculating them, and that was just me being bored before school, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't even think of that, but I used to always just get fixated on different foods and functional foods and the likes. And people were like, "Oh, would you not become a personal trainer?" And I was
Mm,
like, "I'm not. I'm not focused just on human fitness, but I'm on
yes.
human well-being." And kind of, it was, people would say biohacking, but I prefer it's, when I think of biohacking, I think of Dave Asprey popping 60 pills and going around with a big jar of pills and popping them every day and saying, "This will help me live till I'm 120." And I'm like, no, there's so much easier ways to optimize your health without popping 60 pills a day. I mean, that those 60 pills might give you an extra 5% chance, but 95% of the longevity that you can get out of life and optimizing your energy comes from the simple things, the basics that people forget about. Like, one for me is starting your day with a glass of water. A lot of people forget that first thing in the morning, and once they start doing it, they're like, "Oh wow, I feel so much better. Why do I start my day with a sugar laden coffee frappuccino or whatever, instead of having this glass of water first thing in the morning and delaying the coffee for an hour or two?" And yeah, people used to reach out and say like, "Oh, would you not become a personal trainer?" And I was like, "No, I want to focus on more than just the personal training. I feel that people can optimize their health in so many ways outside of just exercise. Yes, exercise is a fundamental part. And once people start exercising, they feel that, okay, well, if I'm going to work out 3 or 4 days a week, then I better stop going to McDonald's, because I know I'm going to feel better if I dial in my nutrition. And I'm going to feel better when I come out of the gym, and I might sleep a little better if I dial in my nutrition. If I'm exercising so much, okay, I might need to dial in my sleeping habit and make sure that I'm not going to bed at 3 a.m. if I have to be up at 8. Maybe if I start going to bed a little bit earlier and having a little nighttime routine, I'll have more energy in my day. And it all stacks up over time. So for me, it was optimizing. I was optimizing my health for a long time because I thought that I needed more energy in my day. So it was like, I was like, caffeine can only get me so far. What else can I do? And next thing I was like, oh, I can dial back the caffeine and dial in on staying hydrated, exercising regularly, and getting good sleep. And while I do enjoy my morning coffee, but I know not to drink too late, or not to have caffeine too late so it doesn't disrupt my sleep. Or let's say not to have alcohol too frequently because that's going to disrupt your sleep regardless. And I like keeping track of my recovery. One of those things as well, I think, I'm almost going on a tangent, but when it comes to fitness and recovery, um, counting steps was a big thing. When the Fitbit was like really popular and everyone was counting their 10,000 or 15,000 steps a day. So I thought, I was like, okay, if I can get 15 or 20,000 steps a day, that's my win for the day. I'm healthy. And, that's my sense of achievement. And I realized I was like, why am I so sapped of energy all the time if I'm hitting my 15 or 20,000 steps? And I said, like, rather than focusing on activity, I need to focus on my recovery so that I have better energy. So then I swapped out the Fitbit and I grabbed the Whoop. And I was like, okay, the Whoop focuses on how well you recover. It focuses on how much strain you have in your day, but also how much recovery you need in order to get back on track so that you have the energy, so that you have the reserve to have that peak performance when you most need it.
Yeah. No, like this is the thing. Look, I sit here with Garmin on wrist. Look, this is the thing. Like, as much as like wearable technology, I sometimes there's times where I look at it and go, "Come on, guy," because look, I will have like the most peaceful, restful sleep that I've ever had. Look, bombs could go off. The world could like change outside my room, and I'll be out like a light, just peacefully away. Wake up, stretch, go, that was a great night's sleep. Look at my little Garmin app, and it goes, yeah, 59, poor sleep, blah blah blah. It's like, and I'm like, I look down and go, ah. No, like I can understand. Like I think there is a trap to like when people do optimization, which when you focus just on the whole, like let me be optimal, it starts to. I think it can become a negative feedback loop. Do the steps. Do the rest. And like you go, and as it always like feeds back again and again, and it moves you ever so slightly away from where you want to be. But like it's one of those things where I love my Garmin. I loved my Fitbit when I had one, but I learned quite quickly don't get don't use them as a crutch. Don't use them as the sort of keystone pillar of who you should be to like get you to your goals because it will work against you. you know?
Yes, that's exactly it. It's when you start using it as a crutch or you become completely dependent on it, or that's your only source of information, that you're not listening to yourself anymore. If anything, I see it as like, okay, this is like a third party that is able to give me some information on some metrics so that I can measure like, why am I not feeling well? I look at it and I'm like, okay, my recovery is 17%. And I'm like,
Mm,
okay, how can I improve on that? And but sometimes I feel like I feel amazing today, and it would say I'm in the yellow, and I'm like, well, if I feel this amazing and I'm in the yellow, what's amiss, or what do they think is amiss? And I'm like, okay, maybe my sleep wasn't optimal, or maybe I feel great, or I think I feel great, and it would say it's in the yellow. It's like, oh, but you worked out really hard yesterday. You might feel it later during the day, and that's okay. And I was like, okay, I'm not using it 100% as a crutch, but I'm using it so that I can be like, okay, I'm going to take these statistics or these this metrics and data into account.
yeah.
But I'm not going to say, sometimes you wake up really refreshed in the morning and it's in the red and you're like, well, I feel great. Should I not feel great? Should I feel red? And then it's just that psychology brings you down. Or sometimes you wake up and you feel absolutely wrecked and it's in the green and you're like, why do I feel so tired? And it's telling me that I'm 100% recovered. And sometimes like it's technology isn't going to be 100% accurate all the time. It's constantly updating, but and but I think it's just a matter of taking everything with a pinch of salt, but seeing it as, okay, this is something that is providing me with information and helping me to get better, not to be 100% optimized all the time, but if it helps me keep a journal so that I'm like, okay, I can tick off that I brushed my teeth, or I can tick off that I had a glass of water first thing in the morning, or I can tick off that I slept with a sleep mask, or I slept with no screens 2 hours before bed. Or I can tick a box and say, oh, I connected with a loved one or a friend or a family member over the weekend. And did that affect how did that affect my recovery? And it has all of these different metrics that you can track. And you can also look back and say, oh, when was the last time I connected with someone? Am I feeling lonely? Is that affecting my health in some way? That's where I see it. Rather than holding it as a crutch, it's again, it's nice to have just another tool in your arsenal.
Mm.
To, as you said, if you're a level 100 and you don't know how to use any of the tools, rather than someone who's at level 10 and they have 3 or 4 tools that they can reliably use on a whim. That's what's going to be most effective and keep you in the game for longer.
Mm. No, indeed, indeed. Now, like this is the thing. Like I have to ask now, all of with this shift in your career as a coach. Now, what would you say when you first started was the biggest surprise for you?
The biggest surprise for me was that when I finally broke the burnout cycle and realized all my self-sabotaging behaviors that were holding me back
Mm.
and what needs to change and how to stop that how to stop that overwhelm from taking over my life again. And as I was recovering and feeling so much better about the work that I did and getting that clarity and on what my values were, I started to become more aware of everyone that I worked with and seeing all of the symptoms that I experienced, that downward spiral happening to them. And I didn't want to just go straight up to a coworker and be like, "Hey, you look like you're like pretty shattered, and oh, I can see the bags under your eyes. You're probably burnt out. I know what you can do." I'm not going to put
No.
anyone in the spot. Like that's not very like productive. They're going to go completely on the defensive. But people can relate. If you're talking about your personal experience and someone can say, yeah, you know what, I actually feel like that too. And then you can
Mm.
say, oh well, this is what helped me. Maybe you can try it out. And that's a much easier approach, because when I burnt out, I was looking up. I'm always listening to podcasts and audiobooks, and I was trying to find, oh, is anyone else out here talking about burnout? And I didn't find many people. I found a few podcasts. It was mostly women talking about burnout at the time, and I was like, are there any other men out here who actually talk about their experience of burnout? And I didn't find much. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to start documenting my own experience just so that I can get clearer as well on how I feel about it. See, when I start talking to a microphone, and I was very introverted. I would not never speak into a microphone. My first episode, I was like, pause, delete for every time I stammered, and I was like, because it was so raw and uncomfortable for me to say out loud. And so I just put a trigger warning at the start of the episode. I was like, look, this is going to be raw and uncomfortable. It's really raw for me. But, maybe someone's going to relate. I hope you can hear that there's a plane passing overhead. I literally live about 20 miles from an airport. Echo cancellation is pretty good. Okay, all good. And so I was like, look, this is going to be pretty raw and uncomfortable. And as I said, look, maybe I'll share it. Someone's going to resonate with it. If one person gets back to me and says, you know what, that that's what I feel like right now, and maybe I should get some help. And I was like, great, that's a win for me if this helps one person. And 90% of the feedback that I got once I released the first 4 episodes was so negative. It was people being like, how dare you talk about your mental health? Do you realize what you've done? That's career suicide. You talking about your being stressed at work, they can sue you for that. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure they can. I kept it very vague and never mentioned where I work. If someone knows me and they know where I work, then that's them in misinterpreting what I'm saying. I didn't burn out because it wasn't I'm blaming my company for me burning out. I burnt out because I cared so much about the work that I do. But I also had this internal niggling negative self narrative, this inner critic that always said I wasn't good enough, no matter how much I did. So I always had the sense that I needed to overachieve and overcompensate for everything and always people please. And I never set a boundary that I always needed to achieve more in order to feel fulfilled. And in order for me to overcome that, it wasn't a matter of, oh, I just need to quit my job and find somewhere else. No, that was something within me that I needed to change. So it wasn't just the workplace, it was also me. I needed to change how I set boundaries, how I rested and recharged and recovered so that I could show up at my best. And people didn't see that because they didn't want to open up that side of themselves. They were deflecting everything I shared because they were uncomfortable with that level of awareness of themselves. And straight up, they were saying, well, we know what you're like. We know you're the overachiever. We know your psychotic work routine. So whatever you did to recover was probably just as crazy. So it probably won't even apply to me anyway. And then I thought, I was like, okay, well, what they're trying to do here is get me to shut up and stop sharing my story. I'm not going to do that. I'm just sharing this for myself. If you want to listen, you can listen. If you don't like it, you can switch to you can turn on your switch over to your Netflix or switch to a different podcast. And they were trying to shut me up. But the message that I got from it was, wow, all of these people are so uncomfortable with sitting with themselves and having that awareness of themselves because no one else is talking about this to them. Their whole family could be feeling burnt out. They could be feeling burnt out and they can't share it with their family or their friends or their partner because they feel that it's career suicide to talk about your mental health in the workplace. And then I said, okay, if anything, I just need to help normalize this. I need to get more people to talk about this so that we can normalize this conversation, so that more people can reach out and be like, oh, yeah, there's 100 people out here talking about it. Maybe I can share how I feel about it too. So I started interviewing people, being like, hey, if anyone out there has ever felt stressed, overwhelmed, or burnt out in the workplace and have found a way to overcome that, and or maybe they've had more negative experiences and they just want to share their story, reach out to me. I want to hear your story. And I'm about 80 guests in of people sharing their experience with the workplace, how they've overcome burnout, stress, and overwhelm, and inequality in the workplace, different leadership styles. Some worked, some didn't work. And I was like, okay, this is a lot of very different experiences, but the same human pattern, the same behavior kept on showing up, where someone hit a rock bottom and then they realized it and they were like, no, this is a make or break. I need to make a change here. And then they make a change and then they just grow exponentially as a result. They overcome that hurdle, that obstacle, something that was holding them back, be it a limiting belief or a toxic workplace, a toxic work environment. And once they remove themselves from something so toxic or something so limiting, they just grew exponentially on the other side. And I found that fascinating. How many of us are stuck in that living on autopilot or living in that downward spiral of burnout? And sometimes they hit a rock bottom, but maybe it's just not low enough for them to feel that pain that they need to make the change. And they continue in that downward spiral, or else they recover just a little bit and be like, okay, I'm comfortable with this much of a of a downward spiral or of this much discomfort. I'm comfortable with this much, and then they continue with habitual burnout, and it becomes like a new normal for them, and it's devastating. And because that has long term effect on their relationships, how they regulate their emotions, how they're showing up at the workplace. Maybe their careers at a complete plateau, or else it's constantly falling, and there's so many people holding themselves back because they feel that they can't get the help, or they feel that there is no help for them. That this is just who they are.
Like, Oh,
That was
so many
pretty
things.
loaded.
Oh no, like this is the thing. It's a loaded area. It's one of those things which, yeah, when like there's like one of the things I often look at when people are in that realm of change. Okay, I'm going to change my life. For most people, they're comfortable with that because when you go, I'm going to change my life, they don't feel there is no authenticity with it. When someone goes, I'm going to change my life, and they've got that realm of authentic change coming on, that starts to make people feel uncomfortable. And they don't like, because most people don't like authentic change because it kind of highlights their shortcomings, their weaknesses. When it comes to the sort of realm of burnout, it's like having a spider in the room. When you're not aware of said spider, you go around your life quite happily. But as soon as you see it from the corner of your eye, it's like, you're aware of it. And depending where you sit on the fear scale on of that spider, if it sits quite low, you ignore it and you carry on. If it sits quite high, you have to get rid of said spider, or it just becomes your utter focus. And when you talk about burnout and you make people aware of that in their lives, that's their spider coming out. So you basically are giving someone like this whole thing which will make them stop. And they can't, they like, and the thing with a regular spider, you can get rid of a regular spider. Vacuum cleaner, gone. Burnout now, that is a much bigger beast to tackle. Lifestyle change, job change, lots of different changes what needs to be done. And if they're not ready for it, that can seem like a billion miles away when it could be down to two or three key things to help make themselves not immediately change, but set them on the right path. But they're not ready for it, you know?
That's the thing. It's people think that it's like a massive mountain to climb,
Oh,
and they see it as something in the distance, and that, oh, that's something that, oh, I wish I could achieve that. When I left my job, and I was like, look, it wasn't that the job were pushing me out or anything. It was, I just came to the awareness when I burnt out. Everyone thought that I left my job, that because that's what people do. If someone burns out in their job, they leave, they start somewhere else. What's happening there is they're not actually breaking the burnout cycle, they're just restarting it. Because when you start a new job, your expectations are high, and you have high energy, and you're like, oh, I have great expectations of where I'm going to go in this job. I'm going to climb the career ladder. And you're at the top of the ladder where you're you're really energetic and you want to do your best. And then over time you start to wane, you're going to lose energy, you start getting cynical because you're not being treated right, or you're not getting your expectations met. And then and next thing, people start quiet quitting, and they start just looking up LinkedIn or going through their emails. And next thing they're like, you know what, I'm going to quit, I'm going to start somewhere else. And they go back and they start the burnout cycle again. Rather than, for me, I was like, no, I became self-aware that it wasn't the job that burnt me out, it was my behavior, the way I was working, and
mm,
I needed to manage that. I loved the work that I was doing, and I loved the team I was working with, but I found that where I wasn't being fulfilled was because I had outgrown that position. And I was like, well, if there's no opportunity for me to grow here, then it's my responsibility whether I choose to stay or whether I choose to go, rather than being resentful to the company that does not have a position for me to fill. It's, I need to hold myself accountable and find a job that's better suited to me. And when I handed in my notice, a lot of people were like, "Oh, I really wish I could do what you're doing. I really wish I could just, get up and leave this job and go somewhere else." And I was like, "Of course you can. If you're not comfortable here and you feel resentful of the work you're doing, then you're not doing yourself any favors. You're not doing your team any favors. You're not doing the company any favors either. If you feel resentful every day coming into the office, that's really bad for your health. So of course, 100%, if you feel resentful about the work that you do, you're not showing up at your best for yourself or for anyone else. And you probably feel the same when you get home from work. Your family and your friends are all going to feel the same. If you're that resentful and cynical about the work that you do, you're going to carry that same energy home with you every day. And for a lot of people, that's just the uncomfortable change. It's like the elephant in the room or the spider in the room, as you say. It's that they feel uncomfortable once it's in their awareness, and that they can't get rid of that thing, or they don't want to address it. That they can feel it niggling in the back of their heads, but they don't want to address it, and they don't like anyone bringing it to light. I think a lot of the time it's when someone brings something like that to light and they feel like, oh, I've been pushing it down for so long,
Mm.
um, that it's easier to come up with a narrative that it's something that's unachievable. Oh, that would never be achievable for me. I'm in my 30s now, and I've been doing this for like 10 years, and I wouldn't know where to go. Or oh, I'm 50, and I've been working the same job for the last 30 years. If I went into the market, there would be nothing for me, and all my opportunities will be taken up by students. And they just put that narrative in their heads as if, oh, this is the only job I ever had, and it's the only job I'll ever get. So I have the handcuffs, or I have the gilded cage, and I could never leave this. And they find that narrative, that perspective is easier for them than the discomfort of, oh, maybe there is something better out there, or maybe there's something a bit more fulfilling out there.
Mm.
And it's just the uncertainty can be so hard for some people to overcome. But I think, as you mentioned before about the pandemic, where it got a lot of people to think, people realize that, oh, I could have lost my job. I could have lost everything at the start of the pandemic. Could I could have been completely out of work. And for a lot of people, that's what happened. They were all out of work and they had to get creative in order to make ends meet. Or they had to just start a new career in something completely new and realize, oh, wow, I love this. I never would have thought of this before, but now I really love what I do. A lot of people got into coaching. A lot of people got into Etsy, getting really creative and doing handiwork and crafts. And it was something that they never would have thought of before. Or people moved from brick and mortar businesses to online businesses. And it just opened up people to a lot more opportunities than they ever would have been comfortable with if they had not been presented with such a big change. What what I think is in Japanese, the word for crisis is the same word as opportunity. So
Chinese, I
is it
believe.
Chinese? Yes. Okay. Because I remember hearing that somewhere. I was just there like, I love that crisis and opportunity are the same word. But I think that that discomfort that you talk about, or that spider in the room, when it comes to burnout, the three the three fundamental pillars for burnout recovery are self-awareness. A lot of people, they hate self-awareness. They can't sit in silence. They can't sit alone with their thoughts. It's a form of punishment. Self-awareness, self-compassion. I mean, everyone has that niggling negative self-narrative in the back of their heads that's always saying, you're nothing, you're nothing, you're nothing, you're nothing, you're not good enough. If you can talk to yourself, if you talk to your best friend that way, they wouldn't say your best friend for long. How would you talk to your best friend?
Oh no, no, the inner voice which lives within. Like, yes, if they were a person on the outside, they would have been punched many a time.
Yeah, exactly. And if that's the way you talk to your best friend, they wouldn't stay around for long. So you need to start talking to yourself like you would your best friend. And if you find yourself talking like that to your best friend, then you're going to find yourself pretty lonely. Um, but you just need to start treating yourself with more compassion. If you fail at anything, it's like, oh, well, that's a learning curve for me. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, what went wrong? Okay, where can we make a change? If you ever have a negative thought, I always there's this thing before about having an elastic band around your wrist. It was a challenge that every time you had a negative thought, that you were meant to snap the elastic band, and you were meant
Oh
to
yeah.
see how many days you could go without having a negative thought. And that
Uh,
is just near impossible. If anything, that promotes toxic positivity, because people are like, oh, I can only have positive thoughts and I'm going to punish myself. Everything negative happens. Life is 50-50, positive, negative. But I found that the more effective way of overcoming that is every time you have a negative thought, you need to come up with a constructive solution to that negative thought. So rather than saying, oh, Susan in the office is such a pain, I can't stand her, come up with a solution. Susan is such a pain. She never finished that report, or she never filed that report. Maybe I should approach her and ask, is there an update? Maybe I maybe if it hasn't been escalated in the past week, I should escalate it to someone else in the team and make sure that it gets done. Or maybe it's time to delegate that report to someone else if it's not going to get done. Just coming up with some constructive thought, because once you find a solution, it's easier to file that negative thought. It's no longer lingering in the back of your head as a negative and ruining the rest of your day. You can get rid of that cloud of negative thoughts if you give it a constructive solution. And it also helps you with your decision making and your problem solving. If every time you have a negative thought, rather than dwelling on it, you say, how can I fix that? And that's a way of just being more compassionate with yourself also. If every time you fail, that you don't say, oh, you're a failure, oh, you didn't get that race time, oh, you didn't get your dial in your nutrition today, you should just eat a pint of ice cream when you get home. It's like, no, it's like, okay, maybe you slacked off a little today, but hey, tomorrow's a new day. Or maybe I can go for an extra gym session and I might feel a bit better. Hey, I might even have a little bit more energy to burn. Great. But tomorrow we're getting back on track. Having that compassion helps you stay consistent. And then the third pillar is self care. Because if you don't have the self awareness and the self compassion, so that you're aware of how you're feeling and you're compassionate towards yourself, so that you're not belittling yourself or berating yourself, that's the only way you can be consistent when it comes to self care, for your health, for your relationships, for your career, for how you deal with your own emotions. If you don't put your awareness and your compassion first, you're not going to be consistent with your self care routine. So there are the three pillars. I'll keep it as simple, as ridiculously simple as possible for people. Is if you have your self awareness, your self compassion, and your self care, then you can overcome anything.
no, I hear you. I hear you. Yeah. Hopefully, you can't hear anything. You're not picking up anything in the background, are you? No.
No, you're not
Awesome.
picking up anything from me. I'm not picking up anything from you. It's all good.
There you go. No, but like this is the thing. Like when we talk of like failure in society, it's one of those things where like okay, I look at failure in the realm of if you fail, that's where you basically pick up like many of your biggest lessons. Like you can succeed and succeed, but you won't learn nothing about yourself or about what's going on until that day of failure comes along and yeah, it gives you a slap around the face and go, oh, where are the lessons learned? But in many cases, when it comes to sort of societal structures, failure is so frowned upon, it traps people in that realm of fear where it's either inaction, where they will not do anything at all, or they'll just simply throw the ball, like they'll just like play it safe, stick to the railway lines, and not sort of do anything out of the norm just to avoid that failure, you know?
Yeah, it's that the fear of failure. I think the only time that failure is really failure is when you don't learn the lesson. When you're repeatedly making the same failure, or some people, they get so comfortable with that failure that they always go back to it because they find comfort in it, because there's certainty in that failure.
Mm,
They develop a self sabotaging behavior. Sometimes it's in relationships, and they always go for the bad person because
yes.
they're like, I know how that cycle goes. Yes, it starts off good, but then there's the really difficult part. There's the fighting, and then there's the breakup. But at least at least I know how that cycle goes. and they feel that they can't go for the nice guy because I'm a bit uncertain about how this is going to go. And that's what happens for some people. And it can happen in jobs as well. They go through the cycle of, oh, I really hated that last job, that boss was awful to me. And then they go into another job and they find themselves, oh, every boss is the same, or every manager, supervisor treats me the same. But
Mhm.
it's like, oh, why don't you go into this career? It's completely different. Or how about you start your own? It's like, oh no, there's so much uncertainty there, and I don't know what the business model will be like, or I don't know what I do on a day to day. And it's the fear of uncertainty, and learning from that uncertainty, rather than being like, oh, I know I'll probably fail in this, but I know how it goes. I'll go with what I'm certain with. And that's the only part where I feel people fail a lot in life, or they get in a cycle of failures. They still shame themselves for that failure every time it happens, and they never learn from that mistake. I think that's when people get in a self-sabotaging cycle. But for whenever I have a failure, I'm like, okay, I messed up this time. What can I learn from it so that it never
Yeah.
happens again? And that's that's the more productive side of things. I think, especially in business, they always frown on the failures. Failure is a big red flag. If you mess up, then you're out the door. Three strikes, you're out. And then people are afraid of failure, or else they're constantly failing and they're not reporting it. And it's like, okay, everything is being swept under the rug until until the heap gets too big to hide anymore. And next thing is like, oh, well, we've been failing for the past 6 years. What's been happening there? And how could we have changed it? How could we have stopped that from happening? Rather than reporting failures and learning from them.
Mm. No, like, yes, no, like it always amazes me, and like the whole thing is ah, the sort of like accepting failure happens. It's it's so simple. You're like, okay, yes, will you fail? Yeah, you're going to fail more times than not. And like if you look at most of the successful people we hold up high in this world, they fail more times than anyone can imagine. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, I failed 500 times before this became successful. That became successful before I had a career in this, and and people just are so infatuated at seeing the end result and not actually sort of dealing with the sort of fear, the trials and tribulations which come along in the way uh, on the journey. So it's just amazes me, you know. Oh, yeah, but like this is the thing. Um, with all of like, I imagine with the conversations you have with people, like, is it easier to have these conversations with men or ladies with regards to like, yeah, dealing with their burnout, dealing with the change, and basically help him, well, getting healthy, let's just say.
That's a very interesting question, because when I first started reaching out to people to talk about burnout, about 70% of the messages I got back were from women. And they
Hmm.
were like, yes, I really want to share, especially how I felt injustice in the workplace and how I burnt out. And people pleasing behavior seems to be more common among women. And I was like, great, they're all sharing their stories. But I was like, there seems to be a bit of an imbalance here. I was like, why are less men opening up about burnout? And I found that men just find it harder to be vulnerable with that emotion. And a lot of the time, and I can say even from my own experience, it was so much easier to bottle down that emotion and put your head down and work, especially when you want to be the breadwinner and you want to support everyone else. You can't show any signs of weakness. And a lot of men just feel that they can't share that side, that vulnerable side of themselves, because they feel, oh, if I bring up that bottle of emotions, I don't know how I'll be able to shove it down again. Rather than seeing, okay, once I bring it up, it might not be as big as a deal as I think it is. Once you say it out loud, all of those emotions become more tangible, and you're like, oh, it's not as dark as I thought, or it wasn't as hard to talk about as I first thought it would be. And people, men tend to hold up this facade around this, let's say, macho stoic version of themselves, the the caretaker of everything and responsible for everything around them. And they feel that, oh, if I show my vulnerable side, someone will take advantage of that, or they'll have control over me, or I'll no longer have this sense of authority and responsibility in my community. Where the truth is that once you open up and show that vulnerable side of yourself, no one can hold it against you. You're no longer holding up a facade. It's like, yes, I can be the strong figure, but I also have a sensitive side and I can relate to others. And that's where I found a lot of men, especially going through burnout. And it's once they say it out loud and they're like, I really had a hard day today. And as soon as they just take a deep breath and they're like, okay, I've acknowledged it and I know I can rest. I can be compassionate with myself. You know, you put in a hard day's work today. May not have didn't get everything done, but if you're operating at 40% energy and you put in 40% effort, then that's 100%. That's 100% of the energy that you had available that day, or 100% of the willpower and the mental capacity that you had to complete that task today. If you got 40% done, that was 100% of what you had available. So now you rest and recover and show up again tomorrow. And for a lot of people, they feel that they can't show that side of themselves. They can't show that they're not at 100% all the time. No one is at 100% all of the time. We're human. We have good days, we have bad days. You can't show up at 100% every day. You show up at the best you can. And if you feel that you're not showing up good enough, then okay, yes, it's time to make a change. You can start holding yourself accountable rather than blaming everyone else. If you blame, you can blame the weather for why you're not productive today, but that's not going to change anything. The weather's not going to be like, okay, I'll give you a sunny day tomorrow and you can get everything done. No, you need to be like, okay, if I know it's going to rain tomorrow, I need to put up a gazebo. I need to bring an umbrella. I need to just put on a rain jacket and get the work done.
No, like this is the thing. I would say with regards to I would say elements of that. Uh, I think when it comes to guys and like basically not so much like showing their vulnerable side. I think it manifests in a different way. I think in today's like sort of like okay modern society where it's more office like based and like the sort of physical side of work where you have to do everything in a team. Like back in the day it was like okay, if you went further enough back, like majority of guys would be hunter gatherers and like yeah, they'll go out as a team, do what they need to do and come back. That evolved into farming. That goes into the factory, like that went into factory. And now, where much of the sort of manufacturing side has sort of left in like the sort of developed world, now it's more sort of isolated and more silo based. I don't think that sort of natural grouping and gathering where like guys will just talk, like just basically talk shit for a period of time. Yeah, technical difficulties. You got to love it. You got to love it. Yeah. Now, as as I was saying, basically with the sort of changing dynamic of the workplace, I think it's like led to more of a sort of isolational thing, where I think guys sort of get when they get together, it's more of a sort of like team unity thing, and they go through a whole heap of they all talk a whole heap of like BS like crap before they actually get to the sort of the real issues which are going at hand. There's this thing in Australia where they get guys to repair things in sheds. To like basically they sit down, they repair things. They might not talk, but then after a period of time, they start talking about the real issues which are going on in their lives. And I think that's where it sort of comes down to it. I think it takes a lot for, I'd say, guys to just sort of like, oh yeah, this is me, this is what's going on, and that people might go, oh, is that a sense of insecurity? No, I think it's just the way most guys think over the sort of like, you know what I mean? The like, I would say most guys think that way over where ladies were like, I've got this thing which is going on with me and I'm going to sort it out. Guys like, I need to just be with the boys. Then eventually, if I've got the right people around me, I can talk about what my problem or issue is, you know?
Yeah, I feel a lot, especially, and when it comes to that, oh, well, we need camaraderie before we can talk about these things. But a lot of the time, when you try to reach out to a friend and they're not ready to have that conversation, they're like, "Oh yeah, we'll go out and we'll have a few pints, or we'll
Mm,
we'll we'll go out and we'll meet up in the bar." And next thing I'm like, "No, I'd rather if we just sat down and had a cup of tea and talked." And a lot of the time, they can be uncomfortable with having that conversation. So
mm,
it can be very hard. Sometimes there's some friend groups that will constantly deflect that because they feel that, oh no, I need to be macho and not show these emotions because they've had this facade for so long within the friends group that they're afraid to show the vulnerable side of themselves. And it's hard to reach out. And as you said, those men sheds groups are great because yes, everyone gets involved in the activity, and it's when you find yourself in a flow state or you find yourself, okay, I'm actually developing a deeper connection with this person, that it's beyond having 6 or 10 pints before they start to open up. It's like, oh, we're completely sober here and aligned, and I feel I can trust him with what I'm going through. And I feel that there's not enough communities like that available. I know that there are forums like the Men's Health Forum in the UK, where
mhm,
at least people can reach out and talk about their mental health. But it's hard to find those communities. More so in the old days, at least people had, well, people had like volunteer communities. They have the village cleanup. They have in Ireland they have a thing called tidy towns, where it's
mhm,
everyone taking care of the town and setting up flower beds and cleaning the streets. And you get out and you help the community a bit. And yes, there's a sense of community, a sense of trust, and you can kind of confide in each other. But again, it's those community groups and service and volunteer groups where people tend to develop connection. That's where a lot of people are missing nowadays, and that loneliness also plays a part in mental health in the workplace. Is that when people feel that they cannot reach out to who they deem closest to them because they're afraid of that affecting their connection. If you feel that you're friends with someone for the past 40, 50 years, or even the past 10 years, you've been friends with this guy since university, and you feel like, oh, but I couldn't tell him that I had a bad day at work, or I couldn't tell him that I was so depressed at the weekend that I felt I couldn't get out of bed because I don't know what he'd think of me, or what he'd make, or what he'd suggest we do. Or I couldn't have him come over. I feel so insecure if we had to talk about emotions.
mm,
More often than not, they'll those friends are there for you. If you want to reach out to them and just say, I really appreciate that you're there for me, or that I feel I can reach out to you. I've had friends where I just reached out to them in a moment of need and I was like, look, I really need to talk. And they're just like, I really appreciate that you see me as good enough a friend that you'd reach out and have that conversation, that you confide in me. 110% of the time, they want to be there to support you. They don't want you just there for sending endless TikToks and memes and reels all the time, sending funny videos and cat videos. They're there for that too, but they're also there for the hard moments. If you feel that you're in a tight spot, or you feel
mm,
that, oh, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this situation with my partner, I could do with a bit of advice or at least help me vent a little. More often than not, those friend groups are there as more support than you realize. r- beyond the surface value of going for pints and going to the match, or whatever's on at your weekend, going paintballing and go karting. They're there for you in the tough times also.
Mm. Sounds like you've had a flavor. How can I say it? Had a flavor of experience there, to
I've had a
say
lot
the
of experience. I've had, and it's even when you do reach out to people like that. So and sometimes you get met with a deflection. People are not comfortable with that, and you're like, okay, now I know that that person's not someone I can reach out to right now. Maybe they haven't had that experience, or they haven't had to delve into that self awareness yet, or maybe they just feel uncomfortable because they're insecure with themselves, that they don't want to give me the wrong advice, or they haven't had that life experience yet, and that's okay. I'm not going
Mm,
to block them from the friends group just because they didn't feel comfortable um, with to support me or to help me. It's only if they start ridiculing you or mocking it, then okay, maybe it's time to put them on mute, or put them aside and say, you know what, um, I don't think I don't think I can have you in my circle right now. Maybe you just need to mature a bit. I'll give you a few years.
wait a
Um,
second. We've gone as far
that's being
as we
nice about it.
yeah. It's like, yeah, it's not me. It's most definitely you. so, so, like, let's take a step back and chill.
Yeah, exactly. And some people are always afraid of offending that person. Then I'm like, no, no, they actually, they weren't there for you when you needed them. You just need to reevaluate who you have as friends. Just because they've been there for the past 10 or 20 years does not mean that they are. Again, what served you in your childhood may not serve you in your adulthood,
Yeah, and like
and
the whole
people
thing.
change.
Yeah, no, it everyone evolves, everyone changes. Like I think the worst, like the most terrifying thing you can say to anyone is like, "Oh, I haven't seen you in years. You haven't changed at all." It's like, ah, it's like, which it should be nigh and impossible. Like, look, you either physically change or you mentally change. If that, like, not less if you're a mortal and like basically some type of sociopath, it's like no. No, no, no. But like this is the thing. Now, I've got to. Ooh, time is pressing, and like yes, I'm in the hot box right now. Now, with everything you're doing, like where would you like your journey to take you over the next few years?
When it came to coaching, I'm only one-on-one coaching at the moment. But
Mm,
when it comes to changing the workplace, it's it's one thing to change people on a one-to-one level.
mhm.
First, you need to change yourself within. But the difficult part is that, yes, once you learn how to overcome that stress and overwhelm and build that resilience over time yourself, it can be difficult to communicate that with a company sometimes, or within your team. And that takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of time to build up that relationship. What I'm doing at the moment, I'm building up a network of people who want to share their message and bring it to companies so that we can help normalize talking about burnout and mental health in the workplace. There's so much taboo around it. I've experienced it in Ireland and UK. I've experienced it here in Switzerland also, that people just don't like talking about those things because no one else is talking about them. And it's only once we normalize this conversation. It's kind of like in fitness. If everyone went around and said like, "Oh, this is the end obesity program," join the 6 week end obesity program rather than calling it the 6 second abs program. It's are that they have all the fancy names, or this is the gladiator or the warrior shredding program. They're the sexy names that you give these things. And in the workplace, it's like, oh, this is all about leadership performance. It's not the end burnout program. It's all about what's the positive we can get here. And a lot of the companies, they're like, oh, we don't talk about burnout, but we do talk about how our leadership team is the best. And it's like, okay, but if we don't deal with the burning issues here, that everyone is leaving because they feel that they're not aligned with the mission, or they're not aligned with the vision of the company, or they feel that someone else is micromanaging their position and they're not given the ownership of their position, then you're not looking at the bigger picture here. Where how can you have a top leading performance team if you don't look at the team that's working beneath them or who they're actually leading? You can train leadership all you want, but if you don't train the team that the leader is supposed to be leading, how effective is that? So my mission is to help start from the top down rather than working on an individual level. If I can work from the top down and help companies to see, okay, how can we get our whole company working on the same level and feeling aligned and feeling that if they do need the support is there, rather than saying, oh, take a sick day and see how you feel next on Monday. It's like, no, how can we make sure that the supports are available, that all the tools are available, if someone is feeling a certain way, that we can help our employees to up level, to grow, and upskill, to become the next better version of themselves. Companies, how much do you think a company invests in software or machinery? If you think of a pharmaceutical plant, how much do you think they invest in these big robot filling machines and the software updates that come along with them? And then in return, how much do they? Yes, they pay an employee's salary the same as they pay for the maintenance and the electricity for that machine. But how much do they pay in upgrading and updating their and refreshing the training of their employees and making sure that they're okay?
Well, I, I'm sure they find some money in some type of sofa or something like that, like knocking about with some change.
Or
But like,
paying for the pizza party?
well, yes, indeed. But like, this is the thing. Would you say, like, with regards to the sort of attitude to sort of burnout, like, yes, you found it sort of like difficult here in the UK, difficult in Ireland, and like, did you say Sweden or Switzerland?
I'm in Switzerland, yeah.
Yeah, uh, maybe a mainland Europe thing. There might be a sort of considerable difference of an approach, say in America.
From what I've heard, America is no better.
Mm,
But the only thing with America is that it they're very outspoken about the topic. And again, it's trying to get changed though is the hard part. Some companies are so resistant to change because they say, well, this is what's worked for the past 50 years,
yes.
and they're not going to accept any change until the the discomfort becomes so bad that they need to change because there's no other way forward. They I think burnout and mental health issues in the workplace cost companies, I think, was it 1 trillion worldwide, $1 trillion worldwide,
Mm,
because of if you take into account people taking extra sick days or quiet quitting, only doing the absolute bare minimum until they finally hand in their notice. How much is all that productivity loss and sick days and mental health leave costing companies worldwide? And I if you invested that 1 trillion into uh, employees' mental health and well-being, I'm pretty sure would have a much higher return.
yeah. No, I believe so. Like, do you know Simon Sinek by any chance?
Yes, yes. Not
Mm,
personally, but I
yeah.
wish.
No, but like this is the thing. He sort like I think it like burnout. I think with regards to like making that change, it also ties into how with regards to leadership. He's been a strong advocate for the change in leadership and like the approach of leadership uh, in the sort of modern workplace today. I think they are like what you're trying to do, what he's doing is very closely aligned because how can I put it? Without a sort of change in leadership approach and attitude to the workplace, we are doomed to repeat the same mistakes decade after decade, which has gone on since well time immemorial. And like it seemed, does it seem like it's getting worse? No, it does. Seems like it's the same old, same old. each and every year. It's just the faces change at the top, and that's about it. Uh, with regards to what you're trying to do, and basically get people to acknowledge burnout, to be able to, once they can acknowledge it, they can then start working on how to rectifying it. I think without that sort of shift, it's it's not impossible. I just think it's a very long, hard road. Not impossible, but a very long, hard road. I want you to say, I want to say to you this: stay strong, because you know what I mean. You can bring in that change, one company, one person at a time, one company at a time. Gather enough people, and who who knows what you can do in this world? Amazing things.
Exactly. It's kind of like if you think about the food industry and you look at how the more processed foods got, the more prominent obesity became worldwide.
Mm,
And rather than being like, how about we change those foods so that people start eating healthier and maybe all of these health issues will go away? And it's like, no, no, let's find the best weight loss drug and just pump it into everyone, and everyone else loses that weight and then keeps enjoying the processed food that is so cheap to make. It's like,
yeah.
what's the quick fix we can do here? And let's worry about the side effects 10, 20 years from now instead. Rather than being like, okay, let's address the bigger issue here and see if people start living healthier and developing healthier habits, will it affect, maybe healthcare will be a lot cheaper because there'll be less sick people and there'll be less side effects, health effects. Yes, the same thing when it comes to jobs. They're like, oh no, what's the quick fix here? Rather than looking at what's the long game. I want this company to last another 50 years, and I want people to, even by word of mouth, be happy to be here or be constantly applying to be like, that would be a good company to work for. I feel like I really could progress. I could really see myself spending the next 20 years with that company.
Mm,
Or maybe they leave the company and they think back, you know what, I really enjoyed the time that I spent there. It was such a good learning curve for me. That's where I would want to be. I want to be in a company where I feel like I look back and be like, you know what, I really enjoyed the time that I spent there. That they really put me on the right path. Rather than, okay, how do we burn out all these people? And once they leave, we just take on another batch of students and burn them out too. Give them 5 or 6 years and see how they, and constantly renew, or constantly have that turnover and completely burn out people, and throw them to the wayside. That's not sustainable. That's not a sustainable model in the long term.
mm,
As you said, it's going to be a long road, and it's going. A lot of people are going to be resistant to change, but we're going to start seeing in the future years. I mean, yes, it worked for the previous generations. I mean, it worked for our parents, our grandparents. That was how they lived. That's how they were conditioned. It was the industrial age is how, just keep on pumping everyone to a factory. You work for 40 years and then you retire, and then you can start living. You can start living in your 60s and 70s. Whereas now people are like, no, I want to enjoy life. I want to enjoy the next 40 years and see where it takes me. And with everything going online and with AI and everything, it helps people to explore completely new opportunities that weren't there 20 years ago. So I think that's the challenge for companies, is seeing, okay, how do we improve so that we can get this generation? How can we get the millennials? How can we get the Gen Zs and so on to continue to work for us? This is the workforce of the future. How can we accommodate them? How can we upskill them? How can we get them to stay in our companies for longer? Because I think that's where companies, you need someone to play the long game. You need someone who's going to devote the next 5 or 10 years at least minimum to staying in the company and helping it grow. If you're constantly changing people every 6 months to 18 months, it's hard to have a long term vision for that company.
yeah. And this is the thing. More times than not, the sort of biggest and baddest companies we've got today have that sort of core of longevity in it. People might go, "What about Amazon?" Well, if you're talking about a warehouse worker, no. But I'm pretty sure if you're in head office, there's been people who've been there since the '90s and like and beyond. But yeah, I have to say, no, ooh, like yes, Eugene. I sadly do not have any questions at this present time, and like I'm desperately fighting off
It
heat
is getting
sources.
late, so
Yes, but like yeah, like how would people be able to find you out here on the big wide internet?
the best way to find me is most of the time I hang out on Instagram on eugene.leeway. And everything else you can find on giveyourselfsomeleeway.com. That's my podcast website. All the coaching, everything is over there at giveyourselfsomeleeway.com. And all my socials, the best way to contact me is just send me a DM or send me a voice note on Instagram and say that you met on day in, day out.
There you go. Yes, go out there, track him down. Yeah. See what let's see how much good we can all do as a collective team. Make that change in this world to make it a better place, my friends, my life warriors. Ah, Eugene, thank you for coming on today. You have been a superstar, you have been a legend. Ah, to say
Thank
the
you so much
least.
for having me.
No problem, no problem, no problem at all. And I'd like to say thank you to you, my friends, my life warriors, for sticking with us all the way to the end, even with some technical issues, which shall hopefully be edited out with a skillful hand. A skillful hand. But that's another story. But let me say, please stay well, stay safe, be awesome, be excellent, be fantastic, be all the positive bees you can be in this world, and then some. Have a great day, guys. Have a great day. Peace. Oh, yeah. And we are out.